Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. And thank you all for joining me to take part in this R3 campaign conversation about care, rewear, repair, recycle, upcycle, being the new norm. Just some background story about my R3 campaign. So R3 stands for Reduce, Reuse, and Recycle. These are the foundations of my sustainable by design ethos and the circular model. The fashion industry is one of the most polluting and unethical industries in the world. That is why I chose to go against the obsolescence of in the fashion industry, specifically fast fashion, for many, many years. I knew then that it was not sustainable. The production, distribution of crops, fibers, and garments used in the fashion industry all contribute to differing forms of environmental pollution, including water, air, soil pollution, and the treatment of people that often goes hand in hand with cheap production in developing countries. In 2013, on the 24th of April, the Rana Plaza factory building collapsed in Bangladesh. 1,134 lives were lost. This had a huge impact on me. I knew then that I was going to have to do more, and be more vocal and visual about what I knew and practiced to help create the change that was needed. So in 2014, during London Fashion Week, early that year, I started the R3 campaign with just 3 garments, one which I'm wearing today, and I'll show you at the end. I wonder what you think it will be, with reduce, reuse, and recycle written on it, on the garments. That's all I needed to say, because I felt that it was important that this part of what I did became more visual. Now, why the R3 campaign? The need to reduce our impact on the planet and its people that's what it is. The R3 campaign is not just about the producers, it's about the consumer as well. So in this case, every man, woman, and child has the power to help our planet through the choices that they make. The benefits of the R3 choice are endless. It is not easy and it is a gradual process, but understanding the impact consumerism is having on the planet helps us commit to it, especially knowing that tons of clothing end up in landfill and the landfill space is running out. Could normalizing re-wearing outfits, garments that you can wear again and again, following a slow fashion approach rather than fast fashion, that is a huge contributor to the greenhouse and gas emissions, be something that becomes the normal. I mean, that should happen, if at all. One of the phrases I came up with through my R3 journey is that the history of a garment is just as important as its future, and you can quote me on this. But then you can also say it's the history of anything that is made is just as important as its future. It's understanding what goes into the making of this thing, who is involved in doing it, what is used in making it, knowing what happens to it. When you know the history of something, it helps you make the right choice when it comes to buying or owning and even using this. So that is why understanding this phrase helps unlock the reason why to care, rewear, repair, recycle, upcycle needs to be the norm if we want to leave a better planet for the future generations. At the moment, there's enough in terms of clothing to clothe 6 generations for the next years. So do we really need to constantly be making new? Of course, we still have to produce garments, but it is what quality and what we put into it. That's what we need to ask ourselves as producers. The ideal is a circular concept, a systemic approach to economic development designed to benefit businesses, society, and the environment. A circular economy is regenerated by design and aims to gradually decouple growth from the consumption of finite resources. The circular model in the fashion industry is underpinned by R3, creating regenerative systems in which garments are circulated for as long as their maximum value is retained, and then returned safely to the biosphere when they are no longer in use. In this model, garments are designed and made with the next use in mind. I would like to open this conversation to all of you, and I would like to introduce all the panelists. We have Dr. Claudia Bands, we have Winnie Samuserima, we have Marilyn R. Wilson, Isabella Asimwe, we have Catherine Sorsi, we have Novieta Torizia, and we have Gladys Tortundere, and we have Rosalind Johnson. I'm going to open this conversation out to you and ask you to tell me what your thoughts are on this subject. So what I will do is I'll ask you to, one by one, to just say, introduce yourselves and have a one-liner about possibly what you want to talk about. And then once we've done all of us, then we'll then come back and go through and then, talk about what subject you wanted to address today. Okay? So where do we start? Who wants to go first? Introductions. Shall I just choose? Yeah, Marilyn? Brilliant. Okay. So Marilyn.
So in 2006, I began interviewing people. In 2007, I became co-owner of a fashion magazine. So I come to this from more of a media perspective. I've probably interviewed over 150 designers, both in person and through emails. And so what I'm coming to share is what the trends I see and the awareness I see and where I think we need to go in terms of our children.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you, Marilyn. That's great. So shall I go to Winnie?
Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I don't know really how to introduce myself where this panel is concerned. I'm just a lover of fashion, and I really do think that fashion, apart from the practical aspect of the functional aspect of covering up, is an extension of what we want to be seen as individuals.
Yes.
And for me, I've been basically upcycling since they even coined the term, I think, because I've been living, outside of my home country, Uganda, for a very long time, and I didn't feel like they made clothes for Black people. And so I was really finding it difficult to find clothes. And I wanted something that had my own signature on it. And I continue to do that. So I'm wearing my favorite José Hendo upcycled denim jacket. Thank you.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Mm-hmm. That's fabulous, Winnie. Thank you. Shall I go to Dr. Claudia, please? Dr. Claudia Bands.
Yeah, hello, good evening or good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Claudia Banz. I'm based in Berlin and I'm a museum curator. And I, like 6 years ago, triggered by the accident of Rana Plaza, which Josie mentioned before, I thought as a museum curator, so in our museum, we have a huge collection of haute couture and pret-a-porter. And we always show the glamorous side of fashion. And then I think through Rana Plaza, everyone became aware that there is also a dark side. And this is something I decided to focus on in an exhibition named Fast Fashion, the Dark Side of Fashion. And it was really about the socio-economical and the ecological impact of fashion production. And I have to say, I was really shocked when I learned all the details. And this was also my mission with this exhibition, to really arise awareness amongst the visitors. And yes, that's also how I met with Josie, because she was part of the Slow Fashion Lab, which then was aimed to show the positive side. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And my credo is really to reduce. I think we have enough. And I think the Western model of so-called democratic mass consumerism dates from the post-war period. And we have known it for a long time that it's a run out model, but we still hold on it. And I think there's really all the signs have been pointing to change for a long time. And so I think also in the fashion industry, because fashion is really a social pacemaker. And I think in fashion, we can really try to, to learn new models of consumerism, because we definitely have too much. And my credo is, as I said, for reduce, and I'm really aiming not only to a circular society, but even I would like to go a step further, that we need a post growth society. So
I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Claudia. Brilliant, thank you. So shall we go to Novieta?
Hello, good evening from Bali. Thank you, Jose, for inviting me. And my name is Novi. You can just call me Novi. I'm Indonesian, from Indonesia, and I've been living in Bali for 12 years now. I established Cinta Bumi Artisans. It's an artisanal craftsmanship studio. We are focusing on natural fibers and plant dyes in Bali. And actually in 2013, when I was doing a research about bark cloth making culture, I actually found you on the internet.
Brilliant.
So José Hendo has been like one of our inspirations.
Yeah.
I think my involvement in this subject is more from the perspective as an artisan, because I'm doing what I'm doing now is a part of my my path in reconnecting with my ancestral skills. So my maternal lineage was weavers, and my paternal lineage was batik artists from Java.
Yes.
And I think that fashion, especially clothing, is very sacred because it is our second skin.
Yeah.
It's one of the first things that touch us when we were born, and it's one of the last things that touch us when we die. And so it is important to rethink about our clothing, about how to place fashion. And so here I would like to contribute what we do here in the studio to all of you, and hopefully we can all share and then make a better living together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Novieta. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'll take it over to Catherine. Catherine Saucy, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I had a bit of a distraction there with the delivery that came to my flat, so I apologize for that. Yeah, so I'm Catherine Saucy. I come from this as a practitioner and educator in the field of textiles and fashion. I've spent pretty much over the last 18 years specializing in a textile process, working with waste hosiery and waste textiles as a whole. But the idea is my practice specializes in the valuable role that waste textile serves within the circular economy, and how we can find hybrid methods of textile production that can allow for creative use and reuse to be implemented both on a small scale, at a medium scale, and in a large scale. And so through that conversation, and particularly in relation to the sort of four pillars of this conversation, we'll say around care, rewear, repair, and upcycling, these are four main ingredients that I believe that are integral to the necessary solutions that we need to create in order to activate everyone's participation. Because the one thing around sustainability that, as I understand it, as a practitioner and as an educator, is that we need to have participation at all levels, regardless of your skill set. It's important for us that are skilled and knowledgeable to share and inspire, but we need to find different forms of engagement at different levels. And so that's really been instrumental in my current practice, not just within the studio, in how I'm revisiting and re-examining some of my remnants, previous, clothing from actually the clothing from my last collection, and how I'm reworking that into new yarns and materials for other applications. And so through my years of being able to do that and understanding that, it's allowed for me to build a completely circular business model as well as a design practice. So I'm really thankful for that. But really, it's just, I think, with the podcast that I established during the pandemic, the Material Revolution, it's given me an opportunity to kind of fill in those gaps. And there's a lot of knowledge gaps within the field. And so it's really about creating, how can we find new ways of creating forms of engagement where everybody can participate within this sphere.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So I'll go to Gladys, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, José, for inviting me, for also introducing the topic of this whole topic of reuse and recycling. Prior to meeting José, I must say I didn't know much or paid attention at all, or even ever thought about the value of repairing. Growing up, we repair things like buttons and stuff. But that's because we don't have a choice. We have to repair what wears off. But coming to England, I learned that it wasn't actually a problem. If you have a button off a skirt, or, I mean, it's not that deep, you can find something else very quickly or almost immediately. So I never thought about if it had consequences at all until I met José. And from then on, I started to look into, because wearing secondhand clothes is not looked upon as something that a young person should maybe be aspired to do. Reason being, you want to be trendy and you want to go with what's trending. In secondhand clothes, you don't get that. So I started to question myself, something I didn't do before. And I've also started to advocate for the reusing of things. I've also tried to make my own garments, which is something I would never have dared or tried to do. But I've got the confidence now to think that I could remake this. I could try and see what turns out if I tried. So that on the side, I'm coming to the conversation from a perspective of a normal, regular person who doesn't have fashion experience, but I want to have the values and I want to understand the ethical part of fashion that I want to instill in the people that I influence, or young people that my children. I've got a daughter, so I want her to also grow up knowing how important her actions or her involvement in the fashion world affect everybody else around her. I hadn't known about the Nova factory collapse until I met José Hendo as well. This is something that I felt like I had the least to say in this conversation, but like, what's her name? Catherine said that having a platform where all of us, even those with least experience, can express our views and where we're coming from on the concept will give the conversation a much better direction in which it should flow and the results that should be implemented thereafter. So I'm coming from a perspective of I'm not a fashion designer. I love fashion, of course, but I want to be very aware of my involvement, and I also want to encourage other young people to especially reuse and repair. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. So we're going to go to Roslyn Johnson.
Hello.
Hello.
I apologise if there's background music. We've gone into a different phase in the UK now, and there's a pub garden just around the corner from the studio.
We can't hear anything. You're clear. There's no background.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
So I have to say something sensible then.
Very. Just a quick introduction of yourself and what you thought.
Well, I'm an ordinary consumer who is non-standard shape and was always frustrated that I couldn't buy things to fit. So I was trying to work out how I could learn to make patterns, and I saw a class advertised, which was José doing some pattern making, and I went along there to the introductory week, and she was talking about, altering existing garments. And thing was, I was already doing this because the things I was buying wouldn't fit, so I was already doing this. So I was really sort of excited to perhaps get in on this course, and that was a beginning of a friendship. And I'm now very proud to be wearing some of her upcycled garments.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think you all know that Rosalind supports me through my work, so she is very much a huge part of José Hendo at the moment. So lovely to have you, Rosalind, today. Thank you. Right, so we'll go to Isabella Asimwe, please, in Kampala, Uganda.
Hi. I know there's probably a lot of background noise. Please forgive me for that. We're working on the fly. Yes, I see her, Isabella. I guess it's a designer, visual artist. I started in architecture as my background, and that sort of shaped a lot of the multi-dimensional work that I've been able to do. And as you know, in architecture, whenever you're making something, you're thinking a span. So it's always like 50 years and more. Or more, at least that's the ideal thought behind whatever you're making, building. So when I started exploring fashion and modes of design, it was like the opposite. Everything is made especially when you consider fashion, everything is made so it's all about obsolescence. Using now, we need to study later. It sort of never ever clicked until I sort of, looked into what my aunt, who happens to be host for this degree, and I realized it's possible to have things that actually last longer. And we do it here in Africa. We do it out of necessity, but not necessarily feeling it. Upcycling and recycling, whatever it's feeling it. I don't have a lot of resources to go and buy things and fly. And so for me, what I'm bringing to this talk is from my own testing as a sort of design thinker and maker of new ways of doing things or ontological design. I'm bringing the question of this sort of idea of recycling, reusing, reducing as a lifestyle, or for lack of a better one, practice, a life practice. That's what I'm sort of trying to engage with this proposition, and hopefully all your input are really see that.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you, Isabella. Lovely to have you. Brilliant. So that's all the introductions done. I think it's amazing what you all have to share, and I'm quite excited to hear it all. So just a quick one. For me, I don't think I will go into any, just say I'm José Hendo, eco-sustainable fashion designer at East, and quite excited about sharing my Earthly campaign with all my friends that I, from across the world, and kind of try to spread this conversation beyond my studio and what I do in terms of teaching and engaging students, because I do workshops, I teach I've taught online upcycling workshops. I encourage my customers to bring back things and I can repair or bring in things in, and so I do this all the time, but I want to engage other people in this conversation, and so this is the beginning of many to come, and I think it's quite exciting to see where this goes. Now we go back to the beginning, where we'll ask all of you now to then share what you wanted to share with us today. So I think we'll go in the order of how we introduce ourselves. Isn't that best? Are you happy with that? Brilliant, fantastic. So Marilyn, you're up.
Surprise! I always think when people share, they should give a little bit about how they came to this moment. So I grew up extremely poor.
Yeah.
Clothes were hand-me-downs. You sewed it yourself, or it came from the cheapest store possible. There was no option. We didn't really understand any of that. So when I began interviewing in 2006, my first interview was actually with Catherine Soucy here. In fact, my first two interviews were with Catherine Soucy does reclaimed hosiery, which I am actually wearing today. It took me a long time to save up, but I finally have a treasure from her. And the second one was an upcycler who would go in and buy bulk things and upcycle them. But when I moved beyond that, most designers were in the standard mode. When I agreed to help co-found a magazine, I said I want to include student designers from the local schools in there. And even them, most of those were doing traditional fashion. Most were just looking at jobs in the industry the way it was. It was a very interesting thing to take my first interviews, like from Catherine Soucy, where she talked to me about what relationship do I want to my clothes, and then go into the general population where it was all about the bottom line. Over the course of 15 years, the trends I've seen, especially as I interview students or just recent graduates, is more and more people are aware. Not all of them are doing circular fashion, but they are trying to be responsible. They're trying to take in the elements that will work for them. The most recent interview I did was with a young designer, I can't remember, Europe somewhere, and she had just founded launched a new brand called Code, CO-DE. And what she was doing was putting QR tags on all her clothing she sold. So anybody that wanted to know if this was circular fashion and know how it fit into a responsible way of production, simply scan the code, and it would give production, and it would give information on the materials and the dyes, whatever you needed, and the care, whatever you needed to know. And I thought we've come so far that people are now putting it out there and making that accessible. But of every young designer I think I've interviewed in the last 3 months, every one of them was trying to incorporate at least some element of slow fashion into their thing. And this is just a huge change. Fashion for me, and it started even with the magazine, is about the people coming up. I'm with Catherine. It's about educating. You build from the bottom. One of the disturbing trends that I've seen in the last few years, at least here in Canada where I live, is that because of economics, high schools are getting rid of all the sewing classes, the home ec classes, all these things that teach us home skills and how to take care of ourselves. The local school when my kids went through, your first semester, first year you did a semester of woodworking, a semester of sewing, a semester of cooking, and a semester of something else to give you a little bit of home skills and the ability to take care of yourself. And those things are now gone. The sewing programs are now gone. So how are we building it? Our young designers have got it, but when it comes to the general population and the public, we do not even make the ability to get these skills available to them anymore in school. And I think that's where we have to change. I think if we want the general population to learn what the designers are learning and the fashion industry is learning, I think we again have to begin to build from the bottom.
Yes.
I think kids, even as young as elementary school, could learn how to sew on buttons, do a hem, do mending. There are 2 books out there, and I have not had a chance to read them, by Jane Melbourne, which I really like. She runs a textile beat. The first is called The Process of Mending, and the second is called Slow Clothing, which both deal with mending our clothes. And really, other than you and Catherine, you are the first designers I talked to that said, hey, if your body changes, your garment, starts to not work for you or needs some repair, bring it in. Let's either mend it or let's upcycle it. Let's make it something you love again. I love that idea. I love that idea. So I think we need to start with our young people if we're going to get rid of a throwaway culture. I'm encouraged by the interviews I do. I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing back from designers working in the industry now. But to make change in the larger population with the bigger countries, it really takes educating our young people. And I have said that from day one. I cannot say how much we need to find a way to move mending and sewing and cooking and all these skills that our children need to live in a world where it's not throwaway back into our schools, so they have access to it, so they come out of school with more than just a degree. They need to come out with life skills.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. I think that's such an amazing insight to what you have, experienced literally with those young designers, seeing how the change has happened. I think it's very important that you mention that, because understanding that the change is happening is a good thing. It shows that the signs are there, but where you have identified the problem is that educating is the most important thing that needs to be done.
It's very in line with what Catherine does, but she's done it in university. She's done it on a bigger scale. I really want to see it come down to my neighborhood.
Absolutely.
I want to see the education start right in my neighborhood, right in my schools.
Yeah, I think that is really invaluable. And that's, I think we've talked about this with Catherine, is something that trying to get the schools to change and include that in their syllabus again, because it was there. It's not easy. But I think knocking on those doors and it's going to have to become a loud big bang to get the action started. But I think that's very true. I think, thank you for sharing that. That's really lovely. And I look forward to talking deeper into this subject soon with you, Marilyn. Thank you so much. I invite Winnie Sanyu, so much, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again. And it's really brilliant to hear what everybody has to say. And it seems like we are, all on the same page, of course, with you, bringing us together, Jose. And that's fantastic. I think for me, growing up in Uganda as a young child, I didn't think so much about clothing, and you had just a few pieces. You didn't have a lot. But I remember my dad traveling and buying us clothes, mostly, the African fabric that I fell in love with most, when he traveled in Africa, especially in West Africa, and bringing back stuff. Unlike in Uganda, in West Africa, they have this sort of they have the skills of making things, and they've been making things for donkey's years. Everybody has their stuff made, going to weddings, going everywhere. People have stuff made.
Yeah.
But that's not the same, in East Africa, and it's quite interesting. But then when I moved, I went to school in the US, and, at some point I ended up in Washington, D.C., and I helped out at an African boutique. It was like haute couture of African fashion, basically. And it was owned by three Black American sisters who were all married to Nigerians. And, they were bringing in clothes from, really like expensive African, well-made stuff from Nigeria, from Niger, I began to learn about African designers like Alfadi, from Niger, and, all sorts of, different things. And I literally fell in love with, contemporary African fashion. Then when I got to the UK, where I now, live, and now, as a woman of a certain age, there's nothing in the stores that I really like. So I ended up, just really mending different things that I already had in my wardrobe that I didn't want to let go. And when I met Jose, it was like, this is the person I've been looking, for all my life. I get most of my clothes upcycled by her, mostly because I know what I want. She has the skills, and between us, we come up with the most amazing things. And it's, it's a partnership almost. It's, I can't go to just anyone, to have this done, And I always get asked about my clothes, where do you buy your clothes? Where do you, have your clothes made? Because they are uniquely mine. I'll end it there.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you. That's an insight. And I have to say that it's really interesting how I met Winnie, Now, she won't tell you, but we were at an event, with Ugandan event, and she was sitting in a hallway. She came very early, as always, on time. She was sitting there waiting for the event to start. That should have started an hour ago. We're an hour in, still waiting for everyone to show up. And I'm watching her sitting there on a table on her own, with 4 empty chairs around her. And she looked so head to toe. And I thought to myself, I have to know this woman. I don't know her. I must talk to her because she just looks amazing. And I just plucked up the courage and I went up to her and I just introduced myself. And I said, hello, my name is so-and-so. And I just have to talk to you because I think you look amazing. And the rest is history, because then she had no idea what I was doing there. I had 3 garments I was going to be showing on that day. Not 3, about, I think it was 2. And one was an African theme, and then the other one was an African theme, but nobody would have known that because it was made out of bark. And nobody knew about bark moth. And even she didn't know that it was bark because it was a different color. So you all know I work with bark, but it was something that I was so unsure of how people would receive. Because when people thought I was a designer, they thought I'd be bringing African fabric. And I said, yes, it's African fabric, but it is not the African fabric that you know. Why this is important is the fact that from that meeting of Winnie, she then comes to my studio and we just spent hours trying things on, and some of the things she was trying on were things I had upcycled, and I introduced the subject to her about upcycling, the fact that I do upcycle. She was doing this, but she had no idea it had a name. So she would go to the dry cleaners and tell them I to take this collar off and do it like this. And so now being able to identify that what she was doing had a proper term for it in the fashion industry now, gave her, and this is going back to 2008 when we met. We started this whole thing. She turned up with a whole suitcase of garments at my studio. And we go through about 20 pieces of garments, or even more. And we couldn't decide on everything on the day. What I do is I keep them. And over a period of time, I come up with ideas on what I think what should happen to them. So that's, something that I feed off her love of fashion and the fact that she's got the perfect body to for me to play around with, for her to be able to express herself the way she wants to in her fashion statements. But yeah, so I'm really grateful for that, Winnie. I think that's really important for people to know the fact that in Africa, sustainability is the norm, but people didn't have a name for it. And because they didn't have a name for it, they couldn't own it. So the moment another opportunity came for them to kind of just buy new, they went for it because this is a brand new idea and that's what we want. They forgot the values that kept them going all those years before, where they used things, repurposed them and kept using them. And that was a way for them to save on the natural resources and also money. So going back to that now, I think that's, Bella will tell us more about that. But thank you, Winnie, for that. And now we go to Dr. Claudia.
Oh, well, so as a private person nowadays, I'm also now in a certain age. I think I really have enough in my wardrobe, so I don't need to buy anything more. And today I'm wearing something that I bought secondhand some years ago, and I really love it because of the color and because you can't really see it now, but it's a certain textile. I think this is also when we're talking about the history of fabrics. So, and this kind of quality is hardly made nowadays, maybe in haute couture. And then it was too narrow. So, and then I went to an atelier because at that time I didn't know Josie yet. And then they just put these things in here, and now, I can wear it. And this is something I decided to do with a lot of my clothes, which doesn't fit anymore, but I like the fabric or the style or whatever, that I really bring it to somebody who upcycles it. So this is now my mission as a private person. but as a curator, I'm very much into social design. And I have to say, I also very much like what you said, Marilyn, about skills and about knowledge, because I think this is super important. And this is also one of the missions, for instance, why I did this exhibition, Fast Fashion. And I have to say, I'm really proud because it traveled also to the Philippines and to Indonesia and to Australia, and it was shown here in Europe. It was really about raising awareness, because many, many people, I mean, we are kind of living in a bubble, because we are interested in the impact of fashion on our planet. But there are so many people outside our bubble, and they don't know even details about ecological footprints, etc., etc. And that's why I think exhibitions can also be a perfect medium of raising awareness. And with this exhibition, there's always going a kind of educational program, and then it comes to knowledge. I totally agree with you, Marilyn. I think it should start in the school or even in the child yard.
Yeah.
That, because this is something, of course, in a museum, we have a responsibility for our collection, for the objects in our collections. We have conservators who are trained to, to give the objects a very long life.
Yes.
And for giving them a long life, they need also knowledge how to restore certain things. And with all this production and designs, there's a lot of knowledge involved, and there's a lot of time, and it's really something that I always say we have to relearn to value our cloths, because this is what fast fashion does. It produces a new type of consumer which thinks, oh, it's everything so cheap, and then it's like eggs and hops. So you buy one item and then the very next day you throw it away. And I think this is very important, that we have to to revalue our cloths, that we also have to rethink our responsibility as a consumer. And I think we should try really to get our own conservators of our daily life objects, be it fashion or be it whatever we have in our, what we love, things we love. We should really, it's about caring also. I think this is something I want to point out, that we also should care more. And maybe one last aspect, and I think it's the same maybe everywhere in the world, I have the feeling that there's a big difference between people living in the city and people living in the countryside, because a lot of things that have become new trends in the city, caring for your clothes and so on, people on the countryside, they do this for ages. It's the same with food. There has so many new trends about how to process food. Sorry, I don't know the English words at the moment.
No,
but when I ask my aunt, and she lives on the countryside, and she says, "Oh, I have my own garden and I have my own vegetables, etc., etc., and I'm always cooking biological food. So for me, it's normal." But she's living on the countryside, so it's not sexy. But when you're doing this in the city, then it becomes cool and it becomes sexy. And I think this is also with fashion. So it has these techniques of sewing your buttons and repairing have to become cool again for everyone living also in the city. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Claudia. I think that's amazing what you have had to share. It's so good for us to know that the museums, institutions like yours, take this seriously and are doing something about it, because I think it makes a huge difference. Because whenever you travel to any country in the world, the first place you want to go and learn about the culture or know them is a museum. So to have museums like yourselves do things like this, engage young people, because I've seen some of your projects where you engage young people, different communities, to come and learn about, new design habits. That's what it's called, right, Claudia? Yeah. So that's something that really is encouraging to know that things are happening on a on such an international level on a big platform like yours. And I'm really grateful because having been part of one of your exhibitions, Connecting Afro Futures, which is my installation was called The Signs of the Now, which was a huge part of R3 really, and everything in there had its story anchored in the R3, ethos. And I was able to kind of listen to people come to me and tell me about their own experiences while I was there in that space, and the fact that they got it. And young people, in fact, I remember a young girl told their parents that they wanted, and they were so shy, they wanted to share with me the fact that they found my installation quite, because I had plastic bottles and headpiece, talking about excess plastic. And it caught this young child's attention that she begged the mother, can I speak to this woman? She came and we had a conversation for about 5 minutes. And this young child actually got it and they knew. So these are the people's minds that we need to turn them now, because they're the ones going to be producing and doing things for the future and running governments. And so that was a really good kind of like experience for me to have had them. So really appreciate what you had to share. Thank you, Claudia. I think now we got to Navieta. Is that right? You were the next one, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hello.
So over to you now.
Thank you, Jose. So I introduce myself. My name is Novi, and I'm an Indonesian. And I think what I like to share also is about how Indonesia is one of the backbone of textile industry. So a lot of international brands production are done in the textile factories that are located here, actually, mostly in Java. And it was interesting to hear what Dr. Claudia shared about the exhibition and that you traveled to Indonesia because 4 years ago, we were actually joining or participating in the Slow Fashion Lab. It's by the Goethe. I'm not sure if you were there. And during those exhibitions, we also learn about how actually the fast fashion industry in Indonesia, and we have 13,000, like over 13,000 registered islands in Indonesia, and we do have more than 5,000 rivers, but there's only 2% of the river water that has satisfying quality. So there is a strong relationship between water and fashion. And if there's no water, there's no fashion. And Citarum River in West Java is actually the backbone of textile industry here because 60%, I think, of textile factories are located there and millions of people depends on those water. In 2013, when I started Cinta Bumi Artisans, I actually don't have any education background in fashion or textile craft, but I was educated in tourism. And then, of course, just like many of you, I was moved by the Rana Plaza tragedy and also a lot of factories that happened in my own country. Mm-hmm. So I started Cinta Bumi Artisans and also started to, just unlearn and then relearn about and revalue about my ancestral craftsmanship. Yeah. And that's where I found the bar cloth actually during my research in Central Sulawesi. Then we found this amazing, one of the oldest human clothing fibers, which is the bar cloth. And alongside of that, I think along the way, we also started to explore with fabrics from upcycled fabrics and also a lot of secondhand stores here actually in Bali, because as most of you've probably known that this is a tourism island. And so a lot of travelers, when they leave the island, they actually leave lots and not tons of fabrics, like clothing that they don't want to carry. So there's this consequence of being this tourism island. So there are a lot of secondhands and pre-loved stores or shops here. And then my team and I just began to deconstruct some of the fabrics and then try to, giving a second chance and giving a second life to it, combine it with bar cloth. And then we started to experiment with natural dyes too by growing our own dye garden at the studio, although it's small, but it is not a small, it is not a big organization. So we're a small team, and we just begin from the seedlings to the club. So it is also interesting how the rise of upcycled in Indonesia. I can't really talk about in other places, but this is the reality that I'm facing today. So there's this trend today here that is actually when we do upcycles, we also wanted to be more conscious in lifestyle and to be more mindful about our consumption. But here I also see some people are actually using it as a tool for making actually a lot more money because they can read that upcycling is now like it's rising, and they started to just sell, for example, like secondhand from Zara or from from other international luxury brands, and then they sell it in a higher price. And but that's not really the idea or the foundation of upcycles. And what we're trying to do at Cinta Bumi now, that we never do seasons, we don't do collections, but we since 2020 we've been repositioning ourselves to actually be more proactive in teaching and sharing. So we do workshops like upcyclings, and then how to grow your own dye garden, how to use your food waste to actually refresh your own t-shirts, your old t-shirts, mending, this and this has to start at home. But of course it's not enough, and so we need to do it collectively. And I think that's all for now, and then we can discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you, Novieta. That's really lovely to hear that you already have, something happening there. And on such, even though you think it's a small scale, I think you are impacting on so many people's lives that you probably don't realize. I have been following you, and I'm quite excited to always find your stories on Instagram, because I think they're very, very insightful, and to see how they responded to, I think really says it all. I think what you have there, the upcycling thing, I think is a huge, huge thing. And, like we're talking about greenwashing with Catherine and with Marilyn, it's a big thing. There's a lot of greenwashing, and I think educating people to make them realize that they need to understand. And that's where the history of things is so important. The stories are so important for people to know about, and sharing the stories will eventually, it gets to the right people. So not giving up is not an option. So well done. Thank you. Thank you, Novieta. Thank you so much. So we'll go to Catherine.
Yes, hi. Yeah, geez, where do I start? Well, I established my zero waste textile design studio in Vancouver in 2003, but my journey started long before that. I'm formally trained in fashion, as well as in textiles. So, as much as those fields are related, they are very two specific fields of study. And that kind of came to be because when I was in design school in the 90s, I basically was told that I couldn't do what I established myself to do. And I found myself actually in the late 1980s, when upcycling wasn't even a term that was coined at that point in time. I was visiting an elder sister who lived in Montreal, in Quebec, in Canada, and there used to be an abundance of manufacturing. That's where the manufacturing in Canada used to exist. And so all the seconds and offcuts you could find at the secondhand clothing store, but it was culturally very taboo to go into a secondhand clothing store at that time. And because I was far away from the town, I grew up in Southern Ontario, it was fine, no one could see me. But, and so that's how I kind of got introduced to the idea of waste that came from the manufacturing process. But it was kind of more accepted, right? Because these were assembled garments. You couldn't really tell where the flaws were, but they didn't meet manufacturing, quality control. And so that's kind of like how I got introduced to altering clothing. Fast forward to high school. I was very fortunate to go to a high school where from grade 9 to, we had grade 13 in Ontario, in Canada, where I studied fashion. And so I was kind of many light years ahead when it came to my post-secondary training, but my relationship with secondhand clothing was embedded from an early age. So I was trying to find ways to incorporate that, but none of my professors were encouraging. They said there was no market for it. It was an impossibility because there was no scalability, possibility within that framework. It was inconsistent. You couldn't measure it. It was all this kind of blah, blah, blah. But at that time period, simultaneous, like I was truly meant to do what I do. And there's no joke around that. But because I was fortunate to visit these massive landfills in Southern Ontario and in Michigan State, because boyfriend at the time was actually hauling trash from the city of Toronto to Michigan State, which is a whole other conversation. But going into these massive landfills, which to me were like these, I could imagine all of these. I saw all these materials and artifacts that that wasn't just trash, in these environments, and I thought these are like these massive grave sites for the future. When I think of like sort of archaeologists discovering these landfills of materials, it kind of scared the wits out of me. And being a design student at the time, I thought, well, I definitely have a responsibility as to what I put out there. So there's no way I'm going to continue on my path using existing materials as my resource. And that I fought my professors. I did make it through design school, but it made me go, I understood that we needed to know more about materials, and I need to know more about materials. So that's why I eventually went in to study textiles. And it's through that process that it gave me, because of like the training and the unbelievable knowledge that I sort of developed from working with secondhand clothing, it did then informed the textile process that I developed working with pre-consumer waste. So I was no longer working with secondhand clothing. I was working with waste coming from the manufacturing line, and finding ways to build a completely sustainable textile process that wasn't harmful in any way. Everything was completely zero waste. And through that, I also understood that my role as a designer was also as an educator. So I did get pulled in very early on in 2005 to teach at post-secondary, but also I had to educate industry. I had to educate consumers. It just I became this voice that I wasn't expecting to, be, let's say. And so through that and in my observation of seeing the significant changes that have happened, and there's still so much more work that needs to be done. There's more greenwashing now, I think, than there ever has been.
Yeah.
And so, that's highly problematic, which I hope we can talk more about at another point in time. But I saw a big problem in the manufacturing process. That's what motivated me to instill not just my knowledge and experience of working with materials, but I really wanted to produce a cultural textile that allowed for craft applications to still continue to exist in relationship with technology and with manufacturing. And so really, I am really interested in taking craft applications and using obsolete processes and textile machinery along with technology to create new hybrid forms of sustainable textile production. And a lot of that, and as I mentioned earlier, the 4 ingredients, that's part of, or the 4 pillars of this conversation, when you think of, not just the care, the rewear, and the repair and upcycling, that's very necessary in order for us to keep our materials in circulation. But it's just that there's so much creative possibilities, but that's within that allows for a creative cultural production that is essentially, it is apparent in everyone that's spoken so far. Like, what's really deeply resonant in that is that we all crave to have something that really is a reflection of who we are at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so how can we motivate that, and as a designer, like it's like really, how can we continue to motivate that and continue to educate that in various different ways and various different platforms.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. That's brilliant. That's quite, insightful. And I find so much of what you've talked about in your journey much as with mine. So there are so many things that when we do a one-on-one will be quite interesting to kind of talk about. I was also quite discouraged going down this path. I was told, what else can you do? If you've, upcycled, if you have reason, what else can you do?
Sure.
And I said, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you that actually there's so much more, 360 ways of changing this whole thing or moving forward in this direction. Break the rules and just keep going. So I wasn't about to be, I almost broke because I cried. And then those are my professors. They kept telling me, just won't work. And I had this, because I'd done my research. I knew what I had found. I wasn't about to say, give in. But I almost kind of thought, because they kept saying, who's going to be wanting this? Who's interested in this? And that kept saying, who, the market, where you're going to be selling these things. And I kept thinking, I know this is important. And so when the Rana Plaza thing happened, I kind of thought, this is what I always kind of worried about.